A quiet night in the city turns into chaos when a jealous mistress breaks into a pregnant woman's home, attacking her in her own bed while the husband watches from the shadows, thinking no one will ever know. But he has no idea that the woman he betrayed is the daughter of a powerful CEO, and her father is already on his way to expose everything. What follows is a storm of betrayal, justice, and a courtroom reckoning that shakes an entire city to its core. Stay with me, because you won't believe how this ends. Let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The clock ticked softly inside the master bedroom. It was close to midnight. The curtains were half drawn, letting a thin silver line of moonlight fall across the sheets. Rachel Bennett stirred in her sleep, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She had been dreaming of something gentle, something about the baby's heartbeat. But the dream broke when a faint, unfamiliar scent reached her nose. She blinked awake. The air smelled wrong. Her husband's cologne usually lingered on the pillow, light and woody. This was different. It was sharper, heavier, floral, and artificial. It did not belong in this house. Rachel turned on her side, breathing carefully, trying to convince herself it was nothing. Yet the smell grew stronger, coming not from the window but from the doorway. A soft creak followed. She lifted her head, her hair falling across her cheek. "Derek?" she whispered. No reply came. The only sound was the slow whir of the air purifier. She sat up, pushing the pillow aside. The pregnancy made every movement heavy, but unease forced her to move faster. The digital clock read 11:52 p.m. The bedroom door was half open. Light from the hallway spilled across the carpet. Then a figure appeared in that light. A woman stepped forward, her heels silent on the rug. She wore a red dress that caught the moonlight, and her perfume filled the air. J'adore, unmistakable and invasive. Rachel's lips parted in disbelief. "Vanessa?" Her voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa Pierce smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "I came to see what he ever saw in you," she said, walking closer to the bed. Her tone was cold and measured. "Now I see it. Nothing." Rachel's heartbeat quickened. "You shouldn't be here. Derek." "Derek?" Vanessa laughed softly. "He's not coming. He said you cling to him like a chain. You and that baby." Rachel's fingers searched for her phone on the nightstand, but the device had fallen behind a book. Vanessa saw the movement and tilted her head. "Trying to call Daddy? Or him?" she asked mockingly. Rachel forced herself to stay calm. "Please, I don't want any trouble. Just leave." But Vanessa was already beside the bed. The mattress dipped as she sat down near Rachel's feet. Her eyes glinted in the dim light. "You think carrying his child gives you power? You think that's love?" Rachel shook her head. "You don't understand. You're being used." Vanessa's smile disappeared. "No, you were the one he never wanted. He told me you trapped him with a pregnancy. He said he couldn't even stand to look at you anymore." Rachel flinched. The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment, she forgot the danger, forgot the smell, forgot to breathe. She tried to rise, to push herself away from the woman, but Vanessa's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "Let go!" Rachel gasped, pulling back. The movement sent a sharp pain through her abdomen. Vanessa's face twisted. "He promised me this house when you're gone." Her voice broke into anger. "You don't deserve any of it." The slap came without warning. Rachel's head snapped sideways, her cheek burning. The room spun. She tasted iron on her tongue. Her body fell back against the pillows, her breathing ragged. Vanessa stood over her now, her hair falling loose, eyes wild. "If you disappear, he will finally be mine," she hissed. Rachel tried to scream, but only a faint cry escaped. She pressed a hand over her stomach, terrified of the pain rising inside. "Stop," she whispered. "Please, I'm pregnant." Vanessa leaned down, gripping the collar of Rachel's nightgown. "That's the problem." Rachel's other hand fumbled toward the small device on her wrist, a smart band that tracked her heart rate and the baby's. Her trembling finger pressed the side button. A soft beep sounded, then another. The screen lit red. Vanessa froze, startled by the glow. "What is that?" It's for my baby," Rachel said, her voice weak but steady. "It sends an alert when something's wrong." For a second, silence hung heavy. The beeping quickened, pulsing faster with Rachel's heartbeat. Vanessa's breathing grew uneven. She looked toward the doorway, unsure. "You think that matters?" she snapped, but her voice had lost confidence. Rachel's breathing turned shallow. "You should leave." Vanessa took a step back. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. The motion tipped the bottle of perfume she had placed on the dresser when she entered. It fell, shattered on the floor. The scent burst through the air, overpowering, suffocating. The smell filled Rachel's lungs, and she coughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. Vanessa pressed a hand to her mouth, realizing the mess. She looked once more at Rachel, lying pale and trembling, and muttered, "You brought this on yourself." Then she turned and rushed out, the sound of her heels fading down the hall. The room went silent again except for the rhythmic beep from the smartband. The red light blinked against Rachel's skin, reflecting on the tears running down her face. Her vision blurred. She tried to reach for her phone once more, but her hand slipped off the nightstand. Her body grew heavy. The monitor on her wrist flashed faster. The color deepened, signaling distress. Her lips moved in a broken whisper. "Please, not now." The baby's small kick under her palm was faint, then still. The air felt colder. The smell of perfume mixed with the metallic hint of blood. Rachel's eyes rolled upward as she fought to stay awake. The red light blinked on her wrist again, slower this time, then steady. A camera in the upper corner of the ceiling captured the scene. The woman on the bed, motionless, the spilled perfume glistening on the floor. The house was silent once more, except for that faint, desperate signal blinking red through the dark. A distant alarm pierced the silence. It came first as a faint pulse from the smart band on Rachel's wrist, then grew louder through the house's automated system. Red lights blinked along the hallway walls. The alert traveled to a nearby control center, but inside the house, it sounded like a cry that no one answered. Through the open window, the night carried the echo of the alarm into the quiet street. Across the hedge, a neighbor woke to the strange beeping and the faint thud of something falling. Mrs. Carver, a retired nurse, opened her door and listened. The air smelled of perfume and rain. Then she heard a faint, desperate cry. "Help!" Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. "Something's wrong at the Bennett residence," she said quickly. "A pregnant woman. I think she's hurt." Minutes later, red and blue lights washed over the neighborhood. The ambulance skidded to a stop in the driveway. Paramedics jumped out, carrying equipment. The front door was locked, so a firefighter broke the glass panel beside the handle and reached in. Inside, the alarm tone grew more urgent. The team moved fast, guided by the signal from the medical bracelet that had automatically transmitted distress data. They entered the master bedroom and froze for half a second. The air was thick with the smell of spilled perfume and blood. "Female, 30, approximately 8 months pregnant," one of them said, checking her pulse. "Unconscious, shallow breathing. Get her on the stretcher. Keep the airway clear. Let's move." Rachel's pale hand slid from the sheets as they lifted her. A medic clipped a sensor to her finger. The monitor beeped weakly, showing both her heart rate and the faint pulse of the fetus. Outside, rain began to fall, thin and cold. The wheels of the stretcher bumped against the doorway. Her hair brushed the doorframe as they carried her out. The siren started, slicing through the night. In the city, 30 minutes away, Charles Bennett was sitting in his study reviewing a late report when his phone vibrated. The call came from a private security service he had installed in his daughter's house months ago. The operator's voice shook. "Sir, there's been a medical emergency at your daughter's residence. Paramedics are on scene." Charles was on his feet before the man finished speaking. "What kind of emergency? We don't have details, but the system detected high stress and blood loss indicators." He grabbed his keys, left his desk lamp burning, and ran into the storm. The drive felt endless. The rain blurred the windshield, wipers slicing back and forth. Each red light seemed to last forever. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind filled with fragments of Rachel's laughter as a child, her wedding day, the moment she told him she was expecting. None of it made sense with the words, blood loss. At Street Helena Hospital, emergency lights glowed against wet pavement. When he arrived, the ambulance was already at the bay. He saw paramedics pulling out the stretcher. For a heartbeat, he didn't recognize the pale woman under the oxygen mask. Then he did. "Rachel." His voice cracked through the noise. A nurse tried to stop him. "Sir, please step back. "I'm her father," he said sharply, pushing past her. His shoes splashed water across the floor as he followed the stretcher inside. "Her vitals are unstable," one medic said. "Fetal heartbeat irregular, dropping fast." Charles stared at the monitor beside the bed as the numbers flashed in red. The rhythmic beeping sounded like a countdown. He reached for Rachel's hand, cold and damp. "Dad," she whispered faintly, her eyelids fluttering. "It hurts." "Stay with me," he said, bending close. "You'll be all right. You and the baby. Both of you." The doctor, a young woman in scrubs, looked up from the monitors. "Sir, we need space to work. She's losing pressure." He stepped back but refused to leave the room. Through the glass partition, he watched as they attached IV lines, placed electrodes on Rachel's chest, and called out numbers he didn't understand. His pulse matched the erratic rhythm of the machine. In the corner, a nurse recorded data from the bracelet. The alert came from this device. It might have saved both lives. Charles swallowed hard. "Then keep it on her." A sudden surge of noise filled the room. The baby's heartbeat faltered on the monitor, dropping to a slower rhythm. The doctor shouted for more oxygen. "Come on, little one," she murmured. Charles pressed his hand against the glass. Helpless, the memory of his wife dying in the same hospital years ago flashed across his mind like lightning. He had promised himself Rachel would never face pain alone. The doctor turned briefly toward him. "We need to stabilize her before any transfer." He nodded, unable to speak. The hallway outside filled with the murmur of nurses and the steady drip of rain against the windows. Time felt suspended. Every second stretched until it hurt. Rachel stirred again, opening her eyes. She looked around, confused, then saw her father's silhouette beyond the glass. "Dad," she whispered, barely audible through the oxygen mask. He entered before anyone could stop him. The nurses hesitated but let him through when they saw the look in his eyes. He knelt beside her, taking her hand carefully. "Rest, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm here now. You're safe." Tears welled beneath her lashes. "She was here, Vanessa," she said. The rest of the sentence vanished in a shuddering breath. Charles leaned closer, his face pale. "Vanessa, who?" Rachel's lips trembled. "His assistant." He froze. The words struck with the weight of betrayal. The monitor beeped faster as Rachel's stress rose again. "Easy," he whispered. "Don't speak. We'll handle this." The doctor's voice cut through. "Sir," her heart rate spiking. "Please." He nodded and lowered his head beside her. "No one will hurt you again. I swear it." Rachel's grip tightened, then loosened. The machine beside her emitted a long, high tone before recovering into rapid beeps. The doctor adjusted the IV flow. "We've got her back for now." Charles stepped aside, his chest heaving. The monitors blinked red, the room filled with low alarms. One nurse reset the system, muttering, "Fetal pulse, irregular but present." He stood there, drenched in the cold light, watching the red line tremble across the screen. Every flicker felt like a warning, every beep like a plea. "Stay with me," he said again, more to the child than to her. The storm outside intensified. Thunder rolled over the city, echoing through the hospital walls. Inside, the rhythmic beeping slowed once more, softer, uncertain. The small red light on the monitor blinked steadily, painting faint reflections across Charles's face as he whispered into the hum of machines, "Don't you dare stop." The morning light slid across the glass walls of Street Helena Hospital. The hallway outside Rachel's room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Machines hummed in steady rhythm, but inside Charles Bennett's chest there was only the hard silence of waiting. He stood by the window, arms folded, eyes fixed on nothing. Behind him, a nurse checked Rachel's vitals quietly. The doctors had left instructions to keep her under light sedation until her blood pressure stabilized. The room was still except for the faint beeping of the monitors. The elevator doors opened down the hall. A man's footsteps echoed, fast and loud. Charles turned. Derek Morrison was there, wearing a navy suit that looked carefully chosen but poorly worn. His tie was crooked, his eyes red but dry. He stopped at the nurse's station, asking something, then spotted Charles and froze. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the machines filled the space between them. Then Derek forced a breath and approached. "How is she?" His voice trembled in a way that sounded practiced. Charles studied him without expression. Alive, he said, barely. Derek nodded, pretending relief. Thank God. I came as soon as I heard. They said it might have been a break-in. Do they know what happened? Charles's gaze did not waver. A break-in? That's what I was told. Derek shifted, avoiding his eyes. The police think maybe a burglary. Charles stepped closer. A burglary that knew the house code. Derek blinked. What? The security system records every entry. The door was opened at 9:18 last night. No forced entry. Whoever did it used the key code. Derek tried to smile but failed. Then she must have let someone in. Maybe a neighbor, or someone who already knew the code. Charles interrupted. His voice was quiet but carried through the corridor. Derek looked away. I changed that code months ago. Yes. Charles's tone hardened. To your birthday. That was the last change recorded. For a moment, Derek's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. I don't remember. Maybe the system glitched. Charles studied every flicker in his face. The system doesn't glitch. It records fingerprints, too. We found one on the keypad. Female. Derek swallowed. So? Maybe a cleaner? Charles took a slow step forward. The nurse in the background looked up, sensing the tension but said nothing. Tell me, Charles said, does your assistant Vanessa Pierce do house cleaning? The name hit the air like a slap. Derek's lips parted but no sound came out. He tried to gather himself. Vanessa? That's ridiculous. She would never what? Charles asked softly. Enter my daughter's bedroom? Attack her while she slept? That's insane. You have no proof. Charles turned toward the nurse's station. Mr. Patel, he said to the head nurse on duty, please bring the security report from the private home monitoring system. Derek's shoulders tensed. Wait, you had a private system installed? I protect my family, Charles said, even from those who pretend to be part of it. The nurse handed him a tablet. Charles tapped the screen, opening the file. He glanced at it once before turning it toward Derek. The entrance camera captured this last night. Look closely. The frozen frame showed the front door of Rachel's house. The figure, entering, wore a red dress. The resolution was low, but the face was unmistakable. Derek's throat worked as he stared at it. That could be anyone, he said weakly. She typed the code in 3 seconds flat. You always struggled with the keypad. Derek's voice rose. You're accusing me of something I didn't do. I love my wife. Charles's expression did not change. Do you? He lowered his voice. Because the woman who attacked her said otherwise. Derek froze. You talked to her. Charles let the question hang. I talked to Rachel. She was unconscious, Derek said quickly. Not when she said the name, Charles replied. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Nurses passed by, pretending not to notice. The only sound left was the faint beep from Rachel's monitor behind the door. Charles took a slow breath, then stepped aside. Go see her if you must, he said. But remember that she may wake up again, and when she does, she will remember who left the door open. Derek hesitated, then pushed the door gently. Inside, Rachel lay motionless, her skin pale against the white sheets. The oxygen mask covered most of her face. Derek stood there, hands trembling, then turned away. I didn't do this, he said softly, almost to himself. Charles's voice came from the hallway. Then you have nothing to fear when I find the truth. Derek walked out quickly, avoiding eye contact. He pressed the elevator button, his reflection shaking in the chrome doors. The moment they closed, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text appeared on the screen. They suspect. Delete everything. The sender's name was Vanessa. His thumb hovered over the message before deleting it. In the corridor, Charles watched him leave. His eyes followed the elevator numbers as they descended. When the sound of the doors closing faded, he turned to the nurse beside him. How long until she can speak clearly? Maybe a day or two, the nurse said. She's stable for now. Charles nodded slowly. Good. He walked toward the window at the end of the hall. The rain outside had stopped, leaving streaks on the glass like veins of silver. He pulled out his phone and opened a secure channel to his security team. This is Bennett, he said quietly. I want access to all surveillance within 3 blocks of my daughter's house. Traffic cams, neighborhood systems, everything from 9 to midnight. Yes, sir, came the reply. And send Thomas Caldwell to my office tonight. When the call ended, Charles looked at the city's skyline. His reflection in the glass looked older, heavier. He whispered to himself, each word deliberate. It started with silence. It will end with truth. You won. He turned away from the window and walked down the hallway toward the exit. His footsteps were slow but certain, echoing in the quiet space. The camera above the corridor caught him as he stopped for one last glance at Rachel's door. The light from inside flickered through the small glass panel. His hand tightened around his phone. "Begin from here," he said under his breath. Then he walked away. The city had gone quiet beneath a thin drizzle. Inside the glass tower of Bennett Group, one light still burned on the top floor. The rest of the skyline shimmered in darkness, but that single office glowed like a small, sleepless heart. Charles Bennett stood before the wide window, his reflection faint against the city below. His suit jacket hung over the chair, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. He had not gone home since the afternoon. The world outside looked orderly, but his mind turned in sharp, cold circles. A low chime announced the arrival of the private elevator. The doors opened to reveal Thomas Caldwell, a tall man in his 60s with steady eyes and the calm weight of experience. He had once served as lead investigator for federal security contracts before retiring into Charles's inner circle. "Thank you for coming," Charles said. Thomas set his briefcase on the table. "You said it was urgent." "No." Charles gestured toward the wall display. Several screens lit up at once, showing rows of data, timestamps, and video thumbnails. "This is everything from my daughter's home monitoring system. I need your eyes on it." Thomas adjusted his glasses. "Let's start with the door log." Charles tapped a control panel. A sequence appeared. 9 p.m. Derek Morrison leaving the company parking garage. 9:12. His car passing the toll camera near the residential district. 9:18. Entry code used at Rachel's door. Thomas frowned. "That's a short distance. He could have been there when the door opened." Charles nodded. "Or close enough to hear." They watched the clip again. The video showed a blurred shape entering. The code entered without hesitation. Then the door closed. Thomas crossed his arms. She knew that code. She didn't guess it. This wasn't a random attack. "No," Charles said quietly. "It wasn't." He moved to another screen showing interior sensor data. The lights came on at 9:19. Movement registered in the bedroom until 9:25. Then, nothing. At 9:27, the medical alert activated. Thomas scribbled notes on a pad. She fought back for 6 minutes, long enough to trigger the emergency system. Charles's jaw tightened. Long enough for him to come back if he wanted to. Thomas looked at him. "Do you think he was outside the house?" "I don't think," Charles replied. "I know." He pointed to another timestamp. At 9:29, the front yard camera caught headlights moving away. The car matches Derek's license plate frame. He stopped at the gate for 20 seconds. Then he drove off. The older man leaned closer to the screen. "You have the footage?" Charles pressed a key. The image sharpened into the familiar silhouette of Derek's black sedan, rain streaking across the windshield. The brake lights glowed for a moment, then vanished into the street. Thomas exhaled. He was there. Charles' voice dropped lower. He heard her. They stood in silence, watching the empty driveway on the screen. Only the wind moved the leaves. Finally, Thomas spoke. "We can't prove intent yet, but the pattern fits. He leaves the office early, stays near the house, returns just after the attack, pretends ignorance. What do you want to do next?" Charles turned away from the screen and walked to his desk. "Everything he owns in this company runs through me. Every share, every contract. I will freeze them by morning." "That's a start," Thomas said. "But you'll need more than business leverage. If you want justice, you'll have to build a case." "I don't build cases," Charles said. "I build consequences." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Then we move quietly. No press, no leaks. Let me trace the phone records first. If he and Vanessa coordinated, there will be traces." "Do it," Charles said. Thomas opened his briefcase, removing a small drive. "I'll link it to the system. Give me half an hour." Charles returned to the window. The city's lights stretched to the river, reflected like molten gold in the rain. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping peacefully, unaware that his daughter was fighting to stay alive a few miles away. Behind him, the computers hummed. Lines of code scrolled across the screens as Thomas worked. Occasionally he murmured updates. Traffic data synced. Call logs retrieved. Last outgoing message from Morrison's phone at 9:17 p.m. "To whom?" Unknown number. Disposable device. Charles's voice was steady. Find it. Thomas kept typing, already tracing. The room fell into quiet focus. The only sound was the rain tapping softly on the windows. Charles's reflection stood still, eyes hollowed by fatigue and fury. After a while, Thomas turned. The data will confirm by morning. You should rest. Charles shook his head. Rest is for people who can close their eyes. Thomas hesitated. What if this goes public too soon? He's still legally part of your board. Not for long, Charles said. He walked to the side cabinet, poured black coffee into a porcelain cup, and drank it without sugar. By sunrise, his access to the company's accounts will vanish. I'll make sure he can't hide behind the walls he built with my money. Thomas nodded slowly. You've changed, Charles. You used to believe in redemption. Charles set the cup down. That was before I saw what forgiveness cost. Thomas gathered his papers. I'll send the final report at 6. Good. When Thomas left, the office grew silent again. Charles turned off the central screens until only one remained lit. A live feed from the hospital corridor outside Rachel's room. The camera showed nurses moving quietly past the door, the monitor beside her bed flashing faint red. He watched the image for a long time. Then he opened the drawer of his desk and took out a small silver picture frame. Inside was a photograph of a smiling woman holding a little girl by the sea. His late wife and their daughter, years before everything turned to distance and ambition. He ran a thumb over the glass. I failed once, he murmured. Not again. The rain eased, leaving faint trails on the window. The city lights shimmered like watchful eyes. Charles placed the photo back in the drawer and whispered the words he had been shaping since the hospital. This time I protect her. He closed the drawer, straightened his tie, and looked out at the skyline one last time. Lunne, he said softly to the silent room. It begins. The lights dimmed to night mode. The single reflection of Charles Bennett stood motionless against the glass, his face set, the city glowing below him. The morning began without color. Gray clouds covered the skyline as Charles Bennett entered the conference room on the 41st floor. The city below seemed to hold its breath. He placed his briefcase on the polished table and waited. The board members arrived one by one, their expressions cautious. Whispers rippled through the group as screens flickered to life across the wall. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ozone. Thomas Caldwell stood near the projector, holding a small black USB drive between two fingers. Everything you asked for, he said quietly. Charles nodded. Let's see it. Thomas inserted the drive. The screen turned black, then showed the timestamp from the previous night, 9:18 p.m. A faint static line moved across the image. Then the front door of Rachel's home appeared. The quality was grainy, but the figure in the frame was unmistakably female. She wore a red dress. Her posture was confident. The woman entered the code without hesitation. The door opened. Someone in the room gasped. Another whispered, "Is that?" Charles silenced them with a glance. "Watch." The next angle came from the hallway camera. Vanessa Pierce walked across the foyer, her heels clicking on marble. She turned toward the staircase and disappeared from view. Minutes passed. Then the camera caught her leaving, her expression unreadable, her movements quick and controlled. The footage ended with the alert light flashing red on the bedroom wall. The room fell into absolute silence. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning filled the space. A board member, an older man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "This can't go public. If the media links this to the company, the stock will—" Charles raised a hand. "This is not about the stock." "But she's his employee," another protested. "The optics—" "I don't care about optics," Charles said. His voice was calm, but the steel beneath it made the man stop talking. "A crime was committed against my daughter, in her own home, using a security code that belongs to her husband." Thomas stepped forward, holding a printed document. "We also recovered external footage from the front gate. Derek Morrison's vehicle was parked less than 30 meters away. He stayed there for several minutes after the lights went out." Murmurs spread again. Someone muttered, "He'll deny it." "Lay." Charles turned off the screen. "Let him." He walked to the head of the table and placed both hands on the polished wood. "Gentlemen, for years we built this company on reputation. Today, reputation means nothing. Integrity means everything." A young executive hesitated. "Sir, what do you intend to do?" Charles looked around the table, one face at a time. Freeze his shares. Suspend his access to all financial systems. Effective immediately. Several faces blanched. One of them spoke carefully. "He's your son-in-law." Charles's gaze cut across the room. "He's a liability." Thomas collected the drive and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "I'll handle the formal notice." Charles nodded. "Make it swift, and make sure every transaction he tries to make leads nowhere." Outside the conference room, the hallway buzzed with muted voices. The assistants had heard the whispers before the doors even opened. Within minutes, the story began to spread across the building. Something had happened between the Bennett family and Derek Morrison. By noon, a file labeled Home Footage. Private appeared anonymously in an internal server folder. No one knew who uploaded it. Within an hour, it was copied, renamed, and forwarded beyond the walls of the company. At 3 o'clock, the first article appeared online. CEO's daughter attacked at home. Husband's assistant under investigation. By 4, another headline followed. Bennett Group heir-linked to domestic assault case. Charles watched the reports appear across the television screens in his office. He had not ordered the leak, but he did not stop it either. The truth was already a storm, and storms could not be contained. Thomas entered quietly, closing the door behind him. The clip's everywhere now. Half the city's talking about it. Charles did not look away from the screen. "Good." Thomas hesitated. "They'll ask for a statement." "Tell them I have none." "Not yet." The reporter on the broadcast repeated the same line over and over. Sources claim the suspect entered the home using a known security code belonging to her employer, Derek Morrison. Charles finally turned off the television. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Below, traffic moved like veins through the city. Thomas spoke carefully. "Do you think he'll run?" Charles's reflection in the glass did not move. "He won't. Men like him think money is a shield. They forget that truth cuts deeper." He turned toward his desk and opened a drawer. Inside lay a stack of old press clippings from years ago, stories about the company's triumphs and awards. He placed them aside until only a single page remained, a photograph of Rachel standing with Derek at a gala, smiling under the chandelier light. He stared at it for a long time. "He used her for power," Charles said quietly. "Now he'll learn what power feels like when it turns." Thomas waited. "I want every contact, every client tied to him, informed that his partnership is suspended," Charles continued. "If they call, direct them to me." "Yes, sir." Charles picked up the photo, then set it face down on the desk. "If the law doesn't move fast enough, public opinion will." The office lights flickered slightly as the sun disappeared behind the clouds. In the distance, thunder rolled. Thomas glanced at the clock. "You should know. The press is gathering outside the building. They want a comment from you personally." Charles adjusted his cufflinks. "Then let them wait. The next statement I make will not be to a camera. It will be to a judge." He walked to the window again. The glass reflected faint lightning over the skyline. Below, reporters were already assembling, microphones raised toward the tower. Inside the building, employees watched live feeds on their phones, their faces pale. The video had already been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Each frame carried the same haunting image. A woman in a red dress leaving a house, the alarm light blinking red behind her. On every news channel, Derek Morrison's photograph appeared beside hers, under the same headline, "Suspected Complicity." Charles watched the city burn with rumors. His voice was calm, almost cold. "If justice does not arrive fast enough, I will deliver it myself." Thomas met his eyes. "And if he fights back?" "He already did," Charles said. "Last night, lightning flashed again, washing the office in white for a brief instant. The room fell silent. The screens around them displayed frozen images of headlines and blurred security frames. Charles spoke the final words quietly, almost to himself. "The storm has only begun." The storm outside had passed, but the city was not calm. News vans lined the streets near Bennett Tower, their antennas raised like metal thorns against the gray sky. Inside, the building hummed with restrained energy. Employees whispered in corners, glancing at phones they pretended not to check. Every headline carried the same names: Derek Morrison, Vanessa Pierce, Bennett Group. In the upper office, Charles Bennett stood before a muted television. The crawl at the bottom of the screen read, "Accused CEO Air denies allegations." He watched without expression as Derek appeared on camera outside a courthouse, flanked by two attorneys in expensive suits. The man looked tired but polished, his smile tight and rehearsed. "This has gone too far," Derek told the reporters. "My wife is suffering, and these false stories only make it worse. The video is edited. It is not what it seems." Flashes from cameras burst across the scene. Questions shouted from every direction. Derek's lawyer raised his hand. "We will pursue all legal remedies against defamation and unlawful surveillance." Charles turned the volume off. The room fell into stillness. He picked up a folder from his desk. Inside were printed copies of online comments, thousands of them. Half defended Rachel, half called her unstable. He read them one by one, then set them aside. Across the city, in the quiet ward of Street Helena Hospital, Rachel sat upright in her bed. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a notebook. The room was filled with the soft rhythm of the oxygen machine. Her nurse had left tea on the table. The TV was off. She did not want to see Derek's face. She opened the notebook and began to write slowly. Each word came like a small act of defiance. "Silence protects no one. I know what I saw. I know who stood there and watched." She paused, listening to the faint beep of the fetal monitor. The baby's heartbeat, weak but steady, reminded her why she had to continue. She turned the page and wrote again. "If truth is slow, I will wait, but I will not be quiet." Outside her window, clouds drifted apart, letting sunlight spill across the sheets. She closed the notebook and placed it on the tray beside her. Back in Bennett Tower, Charles met with his legal counsel in the boardroom. A large screen displayed graphs of falling stock prices and viral statistics. His lawyer, a woman named Evelyn Hart, spoke firmly. "He's trying to control the narrative." His legal team filed an injunction to remove the footage from all platforms. Charles listened, unmoving. "Will it succeed?" "Unlikely," she said. "Once it spread online, it became public evidence. But he's using the media to sway sympathy." Thomas Caldwell entered, carrying another stack of documents. The forensic team finished the analysis. The footage is authentic. No cuts, no edits. Time codes match the home system's encrypted log. Evelyn exhaled. "That helps, but it won't stop him from spinning lies." Charles walked to the window. The city looked smaller from here, almost fragile. "Then we tell the truth louder." Evelyn glanced at him. "You want a press conference?" "No," he said. "A statement, not from me, from facts." He turned to Thomas. "Prepare the independent verification report. Send copies to the district attorney, to 3 major networks, and to the law enforcement liaison. Quietly, no press release." Thomas nodded. "Understood." Charles continued. "Also, contact the analytics team. I want every comment, every post, linking her name to instability traced to its source. I suspect his PR firm is behind them." Evelyn looked impressed. "You're declaring a digital war." Charles met her eyes. "I'm answering one." As they left, he returned to his desk. A new message waited on his phone, sent from an anonymous address. It contained 2 photographs. The first showed Derek entering a private restaurant the previous evening. The second showed Vanessa arriving 20 minutes later through the back entrance. He enlarged the images, studying the timestamps. 9:47 p.m., he read aloud. "The night after the leak." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Thomas." "Yes, sir. Get me the surveillance from that restaurant. I want the security feed before they realize its value." "Already working on it," Thomas said. Charles ended the call and sat in silence. The air conditioner hummed softly. He looked down at his hands and realized they were trembling. Not from fear, but from the steady, measured pulse of anger. In the hospital, Rachel watched the sun move across her blanket. She picked up her phone when it vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. It read only 4 words. "You are not alone." She knew instantly who had sent it. Her father never wasted words. She smiled faintly, then placed the phone back on the table. Her reflection in the dark screen looked tired but alive. By evening, the media storm reached its peak. Talk shows debated motives. Some hosts called it a domestic scandal. Others called it a war of succession. Derek appeared again. this time in a televised interview, insisting he had been framed. "He's desperate," Evelyn said, watching from Charles's office. The tone changed. "He's losing control." Charles adjusted his cufflinks, watching silently. When the interviewer mentioned Vanessa's name, Derek's composure cracked for a second. It was subtle, but enough. "Pause that frame," Charles ordered. The image froze on Derek's face, eyes flicking toward the camera, lips tightening. "That's guilt," Charles said softly. Thomas entered again, holding a tablet. "We got the restaurant footage." "Ugh." Charles took it, scrolling until he saw what he expected. Derek and Vanessa seated together in a corner booth, heads close, speaking in low tones. At one point, Vanessa handed him a phone. Derek looked at the screen, nodded, and slipped it into his pocket. "There's our coordination," Thomas said. Charles closed the tablet. "Send it to the authorities. You want to go public?" "Not yet. Let them run out of lies first." He walked toward the window, staring at the street below. Night was falling again. Streetlights flickered on one by one, reflected in the glass like sparks of a coming fire. Thomas cleared his throat. "The district attorney's office will need an official complaint to move faster." "They'll have it by dawn," Charles said. On his desk, the small monitor linked to his private security feed beeped once. He looked down. The live image showed 2 police cars turning into a residential street. The location tag read, "Vanessa Pierce, Penthouse, 32B. Charles folded his arms, eyes fixed on the screen. "It begins here," he whispered. The flashing lights painted blue and red across the screen as the cars approached the building. He stood completely still, watching the scene unfold from his office high above the city, the faint reflection of his face mixing with the colors of justice drawing near. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the hospital's media room. Reporters packed every seat, their cameras aimed toward a single podium set against a backdrop of white curtains. Security officers lined the walls. The room buzzed with murmurs, the tension rising like static. Everyone knew this was no ordinary press conference. At precisely 10 o'clock, the side door opened. Rachel Bennett appeared, wearing a white dress that reached her knees. A small bandage showed beneath the sleeve on her arm. The color had returned to her face, but her movements were slow, deliberate. The oxygen monitor still wrapped around her finger, faintly blinking with every heartbeat. The room fell silent. The sound of camera shutters replaced words. She walked to the podium with steady steps, her nurse close behind. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. Then she looked up. "Thank you for being here," she began softly. Her voice was thin but carried clearly. "I was told that silence would protect me. It never did. So I will speak." The room stilled. A few reporters lowered their pens, sensing this would not be a rehearsed statement. Rachel continued, her eyes moving from one camera to the next. "On the night of April 12th, I was attacked in my home. I was 8 months pregnant. I remember a smell, perfume. I remember fear. And I remember the face of the woman who hurt me." "Oh," gasps rippled through the room. Rachel's voice did not break. "She was someone I trusted, someone who worked for my husband." The flash of cameras intensified. Journalists shouted questions, but she raised a hand gently. "I'm not here to accuse anyone. The evidence already speaks louder than I ever could. I'm here because women like me are told to stay quiet. I won't." Her nurse stepped forward, placing a folded paper on the podium. Rachel opened it. "This is the medical report from that night. It shows the injuries, the blood loss, the drop in my child's heart rate. It shows that I almost didn't survive. But I did." She placed the paper down and looked up again. Her expression was calm, resolute. "My name is Rachel Bennett, and I am not afraid." Applause broke out unexpectedly. It wasn't from the reporters, but from the hospital staff standing near the back. Their clapping filled the room, hesitant at first, then louder. The cameras turned to capture the moment. Rachel bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. When she raised her eyes again, tears glimmered but did not fall. "This is not about revenge. It's about truth. The truth that no one deserves to be hurt and silenced." The nurse placed a small drive beside her notes. Rachel's hand rested on it. "This contains the footage from my home, the one the world has already seen. It's real, it happened, and I survived it." Her voice grew steadier with each word. "For months I was told to smile, to be patient. to protect reputations. Today, I choose to protect myself and my daughter." At that, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Cameras caught it immediately, the flash turning it to silver under the lights. From a distant room across the city, Charles Bennett watched the live broadcast on a muted screen. He sat in his office, hands clasped beneath his chin, eyes fixed on his daughter's image. The glow of the television painted his face in pale light. "She's ready," he murmured. Evelyn Hart, standing nearby, said quietly, "The world is listening." On the broadcast, Rachel's tone softened. "To the people watching, thank you for the messages, the prayers, the support. To those who doubted me, I hope one day you'll understand that silence is never peace." Reporters began calling out again, overlapping questions. "Do you blame your husband? Will you press charges? What about Vanessa Pierce?" Rachel waited until the noise subsided. "I don't need to blame anyone," she said. "Justice already knows where to find them." A murmur spread through the room. The nurse stepped forward again, guiding Rachel gently from the podium. Cameras followed her every move as she left through the side door. The applause continued long after she was gone. Within minutes, the clip spread across the internet. The hashtag number Justice for Rachel began trending on every platform. Thousands of comments flooded in from across the world. "She spoke for all of us." Finally, someone said it out loud. "Courage looks like this." News anchors replayed the speech in slow motion, focusing on the tear, the moment she said her name, the silence afterward. The footage of her standing in white became an image shared on billboards, stories, and magazine covers. Meanwhile, at Derek Morrison's company headquarters, chaos erupted. Calls from investors went unanswered. A few employees walked out, unwilling to defend him. The same video played in the lobby on a muted screen, repeating Rachel's words. "I am not afraid." Vanessa Pierce's name flooded social media again. Her face appeared beside Rachel's in every article, the contrast stark. One represented guilt, the other resilience. By evening, television commentators called Rachel's statement a turning point in the conversation on power and abuse. Others called it a declaration of independence from silence. In the hospital, Rachel sat by the window of her room, looking out at the sunset. The sky glowed gold over the city skyline. The nurse entered quietly. "They said your speech reached almost 1 million viewers already." Rachel smiled faintly. "That's one more reason to heal faster." Lee. Her hand moved to her stomach, feeling a gentle movement beneath her palm. The monitor beside her bed blinked a soft green now instead of red. Across town, Charles turned off the TV. The room returned to silence. He walked to the window where the city lights flickered like scattered stars. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders eased slightly. Evelyn glanced at him. "You did this for her." "No," he said. "She did this for herself." He watched the reflection of the skyline on the glass, each light trembling against the night. The world finally saw what she endured. Now they'll see what truth can do. He remained there as the city continued to react, headlines spreading, voices rising. The sound of applause from the live broadcast lingered faintly through the speakers before fading into quiet. And somewhere across the digital world, Rachel's image, her tear, her strength, continued to travel, illuminating screens like a flame that refused to die. Inside her hospital room, photographers outside caught one final shot through the glass. Rachel holding her stomach, eyes lifted toward the light. The reflection of the sunset shimmered across her tear-streaked face as the flashes painted silver patterns on the window. The city's noise faded into a hush. For a moment, everything stood still. The last flash went off, freezing that image forever. Morning broke with a sky the color of iron. Clouds hung low over the financial district, pressing against the skyline as if waiting for something to collapse. Outside the glass tower of Morrison Global, a crowd had already formed. Reporters held microphones like weapons. Police cruisers idled along the curb. The reflection of their red and blue lights shimmered against the mirrored facade of the building. Inside, Derek Morrison stood in the center of his office, staring at the screens that had once made him feel invincible. Every channel displayed the same image, his own face beside the words, "Official warrant issued." He reached for the remote, turned off the monitor, and exhaled. The door burst open. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by plainclothes detectives. Their presence filled the room with cold authority. "Mr. Morrison," the lead officer said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy and aggravated assault." Derek's mouth opened, but no words came out. He had imagined this moment 100 times since the story broke, but reality moved slower, heavier. "This is a mistake," he said finally. "I've already spoken with my lawyer." One detective stepped forward, showing the paper. "Signed by Judge Leland at 7:45 this morning. You'll have counsel at booking." Voo. The sound of cameras echoed from the hallway as employees gathered near the open door. Derek straightened his tie, trying to salvage the last fragment of control. "I'll come quietly," he said. When the officer approached with handcuffs, Derek flinched. Not in front of them. The officer's tone was firm. "It's standard procedure." The cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the sound sharp as glass breaking. Gasps spread among the staff. Phones were raised, recording every second. Someone whispered, "He's really done." Flashes erupted from the lobby below as security escorted him through the glass corridor. The once polished floors reflected the cold glare of the cameras. Derek's shoes slipped slightly on the marble as he walked, shoulders rigid. Outside, reporters shouted questions that blended into a single storm of noise. "Mr. Morrison, do you deny the charges? Was your assistant involved? Did you watch the attack happen?" He said nothing. His jaw tightened. Rain began to fall again. Soft at first, then harder, dotting his shirt with dark stains. The police guided him toward the waiting car. As he stepped onto the pavement, a reporter thrust a microphone near his face. "What do you have to say to your wife?" For a moment, Derek's composure cracked. His lips trembled. Then he looked straight at the cameras. "Tell her this isn't over." The officers pushed him gently into the back seat. The door slammed shut. Across town, in the upper floors of a luxury tower, Vanessa Pierce paced her penthouse living room. She wore a silk robe and heavy makeup, as if armor could hide panic. The morning news played on mute, showing Derek's arrest from every angle. Her phone rang again and again. She ignored it. A knock sounded at the door, sharp, rhythmic. She froze. Another knock, louder this time. Then a man's voice. "Police department. Miss Pierce, we have a warrant." Vanessa backed away, shaking her head. "No, no, no." She snatched her purse and ran toward the balcony, but the door burst open. 2 detectives entered, followed by officers in plain uniforms. "Vanessa Pierce," one said clearly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault and obstruction of justice." She clutched the purse tighter. "You don't understand. He told me she'd never press charges. He said he'd handle it." The detective's tone remained steady. "Please place the bag on the floor." Vanessa's hands shook, lipstick smeared at the corner of her mouth. She dropped the purse, tears streaking her mascara. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "Then you can explain it downtown," the officer replied. As they read her rights, the cameras outside the building caught the reflection of the scene through the tall windows. Neighbors filmed from balconies. The first photos hit the internet within minutes. At Bennett Tower, Charles stood before a wall of monitors, each one displaying a different live feed. On the left screen, Derek was being driven through a line of flashing lights. On the right, Vanessa was being escorted through the marble lobby of her building, her face hidden behind dark glasses. Evelyn Hart entered quietly. "It's happening on both sides now," she said. Charles nodded. Justice moves faster when truth has a spotlight. He watched as the police car turned onto the main boulevard. Rain streaked the windshield. Through the glass reflection, Derek's face looked pale and small. Evelyn hesitated. "Do you want the media silenced after this?" "No," Charles said. "Let them see what accountability looks like." At the hospital, Rachel sat in her wheelchair near the window, watching the same broadcast on a muted television. Her nurse adjusted the blinds, but Rachel shook her head. "Leave it open." On the screen, she saw Derek's image surrounded by reporters, his once polished hair drenched in rain. His lips moved, but the sound was muted. She could imagine the words anyway. "This isn't over." Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked softly. Charles's phone vibrated. A message flashed across the screen. "Both in custody." He turned off the monitors one by one until only a single image remained. A frozen frame of the arrest, lights reflecting in the rain. Down on the street, journalists crowded around the police cars. A young reporter shouted above the noise. "Mr. Bennett, is this justice?" Charles stepped out from the lobby doors. The flashbulbs burst like lightning. He did not answer immediately. The rain soaked his coat, but he did not move. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, deliberate. "Justice is not a headline," he said. "It's a mirror." The cameras captured his face as another wave of flashes exploded. His expression was unreadable. The reporters shouted again, but the police cars began to pull away, sirens wailing through the wet air. Rachel watched from the hospital as the vehicles disappeared into the distance. The reflection of the flashing lights danced across the window pane, painting red and blue streaks across her face. In the control room of the local news station, an editor whispered to his team, "Keep the feed running. This is history." The sirens faded, replaced by the hum of engines and the clicking of cameras resetting. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean but leaving the air heavy with electricity. On the final live frame, the handcuffs around Derek Morrison's wrists glinted under a burst of flash. The metal caught the light, white and merciless. Then the camera zoomed in, freezing the moment as the door of the police car closed. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and rain. Outside, crowds filled the steps, holding umbrellas and signs. Television vans lined the street, their antennas rising toward the cloudy sky. Inside, security officers guided people through metal detectors, while reporters whispered updates into microphones. It was the trial everyone had been waiting for. The courtroom itself was large and cold. High windows let in strips of pale light. The seal of the United States District Court hung behind the judge's bench, gleaming under the lamps. Rows of journalists filled the gallery, notebooks open, cameras ready. In the front row sat Charles Bennett, his hands clasped, his eyes fixed forward. Beside him, Rachel rested quietly, her posture calm but unyielding. At the defense table, Derek Morrison sat in a dark suit. His hair was slicked back, but exhaustion lined his face. The silver cufflinks he once wore proudly had been replaced by shaking fingers that would not stay still. Beside him, his attorney leaned in, whispering something meant to reassure. Across the aisle, Vanessa Pierce waited for the proceedings to begin. She looked nothing like the confident woman in the video. Her red hair was tied in a loose bun, her wrists trembling slightly as she rubbed them together. She avoided Derek's eyes. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Everyone stood as Judge Howard entered, robes flowing, expression severe. He took his seat and surveyed the room. "This court is now in session," he said. "Case number 417C, the state versus Derek Morrison and Vanessa Pierce." The murmur in the gallery subsided. The prosecution began with calm precision. The lead prosecutor, a woman with silver glasses and steady tone, addressed the jury. "What you will see and hear today is not speculation. It is proof. Proof that two people conspired to harm a woman who trusted them. Proof that greed and jealousy led to violence." She clicked a remote. The large screen behind her flickered to life. The footage began to play. The jurors leaned forward as the grainy image of Rachel's home appeared. They saw the woman in red enter, walk upstairs, and vanish into the shadows. The silence in the courtroom deepened. When the alarm light flashed on screen, several jurors flinched. Rachel's breathing grew uneven, but she stayed composed. Charles reached over, gently touching her hand beneath the table. The prosecutor paused the footage. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is not fiction. The time code you see here matches the defendant's phone records. At 9:17 p.m., Derek Morrison texted this woman, 'It's open.' She displayed the message on another monitor. Gasps spread across the room. Derek's attorney objected, claiming the text lacked context. The judge overruled. Then came the medical report, read aloud by the attending physician. "Severe abdominal trauma, fetal distress, patient unconscious upon arrival." The prosecutor turned to the witness stand. "Doctor, did the patient survive because of her own action?" "Yes," the doctor said. The emergency alert device on her wrist activated automatically. It sent a signal that saved both lives. The jurors nodded solemnly. When it was Vanessa's turn to testify, the room fell into an uneasy silence. She stood shakily, escorted to the stand by two officers. Her voice was barely audible at first. "They told me I had to," she said. "Who told you?" the prosecutor asked. She looked down at her hands. "He did, Derek." A low murmur swept through the crowd. Derek's lawyer rose immediately. Objection, hearsay. Sustained in part, the judge said. But the witness may describe her direct interactions. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. He said she was ruining everything, that the baby wasn't even his. He said if she disappeared, we could start over. I didn't mean to hurt her that badly. I just wanted to scare her. Rachel closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. The cameras clicked softly, capturing the moment. The prosecutor approached. Miss Pierce, did the defendant, Mr. Morrison, tell you the access code to Mrs. Bennett's house? Yes. What was it? His birthday. The prosecutor let the silence hang. No further questions. You so. When Derek took the stand, the room tensed again. He looked smaller than before. His confidence eroded. His lawyer guided him with gentle prompts. I never told her to do anything, Derek said quickly. She acted on her own. I loved my wife. I was trying to protect her. The prosecutor stepped forward. Protect her? From what? From herself, he said, his voice cracking. She was unstable. She made up stories. Stories? The prosecutor lifted a folder. Are you saying the video, the text messages, and your assistant's testimony are all stories? Derek's lips tightened. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Mr. Morrison, the prosecutor continued, were you outside your wife's house at the time of the attack? He hesitated. I was nearby. Nearby, she repeated, letting the words settle. And you heard her screams? His jaw clenched. I didn't know what was happening. So you stayed in your car, she said softly. Derek looked down. The silence answered for him. When the prosecutor returned to her table, she said simply, no further questions. The courtroom felt like a held breath. Judge Howard leaned forward. The jury will now deliberate. The minutes stretched into hours. The crowd outside waited in the rain. Umbrellas pressed close together. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. When the jurors finally returned, their faces were solemn. The forewoman stood. We find the defendant Vanessa Pierce guilty of conspiracy and assault. Vanessa's knees buckled. The bailiff steadied her. And we find the defendant Derek Morrison guilty of accomplice to aggravated assault. A low wave of sound filled the room. The judge raised a hand for silence. He turned to the defendants. Miss Pierce, you are sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Mr. Morrison, you are sentenced to 30 years in federal custody. Vanessa began to sob quietly. Derek stared straight ahead, his expression blank, lips trembling. The judge lifted his gavel. May this serve as a reminder that power without conscience destroys everything it touches. He struck the bench once. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. In the front row, Rachel exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. She looked toward her father. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. He leaned close enough for her to hear his whisper. Justice doesn't need vengeance, he said. It only needs courage. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. The judge struck the gavel again. Guilty. The word filled the room, final and absolute. The crowd erupted outside the courthouse, voices rising against the gray sky as the rain began to fall once more. Inside, the echo of that single word lingered like the last sound before silence. The city woke to a calm morning. The storm that had once swallowed it in noise was gone. A soft light touched the glass towers, painting them gold. Inside a small townhouse near the river, the sound of an infant's laughter echoed through an open window. Rachel Bennett stood beside the crib, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. The baby's tiny fingers reached up toward her face. "Good morning, Olivia," she whispered. "You're early, just like your mother always is." Olivia gurgled and kicked her feet. Her eyes were clear, bright, and full of new light. The gentle rhythm of the child's breathing filled the room. Rachel lifted her into her arms and walked to the window. Outside, the river shimmered under the early Sunday. The water carried the reflection of the skyline like a second sky. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of Charles Bennett holding the newborn a few weeks earlier, his smile proud but tired. He had stepped down from the company the month before, transferring full control to the new board and announcing a foundation in his daughter's and granddaughter's name, the Olivia Foundation. Rachel remembered the speech he gave at the launch event. She had watched from home with Olivia asleep on her lap. Charles stood behind a white podium surrounded by journalists. "We cannot erase cruelty," he said. but we can build places where kindness has room to grow. Mend? Now that memory lingered in her mind like a soft echo. The front door opened downstairs. She heard footsteps on the wooden floor and smiled. "You're early," she called out. Charles appeared in the doorway, dressed simply in a light coat. His hair had grown grayer, but his eyes still carried the same sharpness. He looked at his daughter and the child in her arms. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "The city's too quiet these days." Rachel smiled. "That's a good problem. He stepped closer, looking at the baby. "She looks stronger." "She is," Rachel said. "The doctor says she's perfect." Charles nodded, then looked around the room. The walls were painted pale blue, sunlight glinting on small picture frames. "You made this a home again." Rachel turned to him. "You did, Dad. You gave me a second chance." He shook his head. "No, you built it yourself. I only cleared the noise." They both looked out the window for a while, watching the city stretch awake. Boats moved along the river, leaving white trails in the water. A church bell rang somewhere across town. Charles took a deep breath. "You know, when I left the company, people called it the end of an era. I told them they were wrong. It's the start of something better." Rachel smiled faintly. "And what's that?" "An empire that doesn't destroy what it loves," he said quietly. She turned to him. "You sound like Mom." For a moment, silence settled between them. The morning light softened every edge of the room. Charles's gaze drifted to a small silver frame on the shelf, a photograph of his late wife holding Rachel as a baby. He walked over and picked it up, brushing a layer of dust from the glass. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "Of both of you." Rachel's voice lowered. "I hope she knows we made it through." "She knows," Charles replied. "She always did." He placed the frame back and sat down in the armchair near the window. Olivia stretched her small arms toward him, and he smiled, taking her gently into his lap. The baby studied his face, curious and unafraid. "You have her eyes," he murmured. Rachel leaned against the windowsill, arms crossed, watching them. "She's lucky to have you." Charles shook his head. "I'm the lucky one. I thought I lost everything the night you were hurt. But this," he said, looking down at the baby, "this is what justice really gives us, a chance to start again." Joe. Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling light across the river. The city glowed. For the first time in a long time, there was no noise, no sirens, no headlines, just the quiet pulse of life continuing. Charles stood, holding Olivia carefully. "Come on," he said. "Let's take her outside." They stepped into the small garden behind the house. The grass was damp with dew. The air smelled of earth and lilacs. Rachel laid a white blanket on the ground, and Charles sat beside her, lowering the baby onto it. Olivia reached for the sunlight with both hands, laughing. Rachel watched her daughter's laughter rise into the air, light and pure. "I used to think happiness was something that had to be earned," she said softly. "Now I think it's something that grows when we stop trying to own it." Charles looked at her, pride and peace in his eyes. "You've learned more than I ever did." She smiled. "You taught me where to look." For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the river beyond the garden wall. A gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint chime of a passing bicycle bell. Rachel turned toward the sky. The sunlight reflected in her eyes, warm and unbroken. "I used to be afraid of mornings," she said. "They reminded me of everything that had to be faced. Now they remind me of everything that survived." Charles reached over, touching her hand. "Then the worst is behind us." She nodded slowly. "And the best is still ahead." They both looked down at Olivia, who had fallen asleep under the sunlight, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the wind. Charles whispered, "Every empire begins with one heartbeat." Rachel closed her eyes, memorizing the sound of her daughter's breathing. The city beyond the garden stirred again, trains rumbling softly in the distance. The sun climbed above the tallest buildings, washing the sky in gold. The glass towers of Bennett Group gleamed across the river, no longer symbols of cold ambition but of endurance. Rachel stood and walked toward the gate, holding her daughter close. At the edge of the garden path, she turned back to her father. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded. "Go on, the day's waiting." She smiled and walked toward the light. The morning air wrapped around her like a promise. The breeze lifted her hair as the sound of the city joined the rhythm of her footsteps. Behind her, Charles remained in the garden, eyes on the sunrise. The gold reflection of the river shimmered against his face. For the first time, there was nothing left to fix, nothing left to fight, only peace. And as the first full light of dawn washed over the house, the world felt new again.